The Rats of Pangaea by Dan Hernandez. Did you hear the world is ending again? King Baucis didn't pose the question with any particular sense of urgency, letting the words rise and dissipate like plumes of smoke from a dying fire. The two men sat together on a small bench overlooking the bad wharf. The good wharf had been taken by the sea decades ago. The sun was out, half-heartedly beating down just enough to add texture to the gray of the horizon, though nothing like warmth. Revik the rat finally answered with more truth than he'd intended. Don't worry. My world's ended lots of times, and I'm still here. In a few minutes, the fishing boats would begin pulling in. If they could string together a few coins, King Baucis had promised to buy Revik char-broiled gelfie on a stick, so fresh the tail would twitch, as if the animal were still trying to swim away from its fate. For some reason, Revik found the idea distasteful. But a meal was a meal, especially if it wasn't his coin doing the buying or his tail doing the twitching. In truth, Revik found a great deal about King Baucis distasteful. King Baucis fancied himself a poet, a hairy, padded man, perhaps from eating too much gelfie. King Baucis was prone to make grand proclamations about the ethical degradation of the human condition, or allude to his many numinous religious experiences. Revik couldn't be sure where King Baucis hailed from. It wasn't Aristai, and King Baucis wasn't forthcoming on the subject, though occasionally Revik detected a slight Jumbanese accent. Revik was reasonably sure Jumba had no king. This time is different, King Baucis patiently explained. You've seen it yourself. Sabotage from within, Aristai betrayed, the young liberator hardening his heart and preparing for war with a foe we can barely understand. King Baucis dropped his voice to a harsh whisper. Infiltrators. Enemies who mean to take back what is theirs. Accounts must be settled, Revik. In the end, the rent is always due. Revik wiped his watery eyes with the back of his hand, braced his long legs against the squat stone wall running along the pathway down to the water, and then shrugged. What can we do against it? Nothing, probably. It's freeing in a way, don't you think? Revik didn't find it freeing, but he kept silent. Revik had learned it was usually braver to say nothing. It was one of those hard-won observations that had set into rule during Revik's time exploring the seedier parts of the city. Observation was Revik's bread and butter, sometimes quite literally. Information was prized in Aristai, by the peacekeepers, by criminals, and by everyone in between. Revik's job was to make sure he saw enough, heard enough, hell, smelled and tasted enough to provide some sweet morsel of rumor, of innuendo, to an interested party in exchange for ever so modest compensation. It wasn't honest work, which is probably why Revik was so suited to it. And lately the news had been bitter. The Aristai had returned. He-she priests conducted campaigns of terror, infiltrating the government, testing the weak points of society. At first, Revik had profited from such rumors. As rumor was confirmed as fact, as the underground whispers rose up, for the first time in his life, Revik would have traded some of his winnings for a greater measure of peace. Then again, no one ever became rich during peacetime. King Baucis turned to look at Revik, and between the curls falling down across his round face, Revik saw resolve in his friend's eyes. I think it's time to leave. Leave for good. You don't want to be the last one out the door, Revik. Believe me, there's no prize for that. At least, no prize you'd like to win. Where would we go? I hear strange things out of Hajawi. People fleeing, farmers throwing down their shovels or whatever it is they used to farm with and making for the coast. Hell, I've even heard Weimaran is ready to accept technology. So where does that leave? Imanda? Tazarak? I've never even been out of the city, and... King Baucis sighed and tucked an errant curl behind his ear. Listen to me, Revik. I'm saying there's nowhere safe. It's time to go beyond this land, beyond ourselves, to the sea, to the sea, to the sea. Revik finally understood what King Baucis was hinting at in his typically circuitous way. You've been talking to those idiots in the Farland Society again, haven't you? King Baucis stood up, barely taller than the bench. I have done more than talk. I have secured us passage out to safety. In 2 days, a ship will leave Aristai, what the Farlanders call a progenitor ship. and we shall find the patches of earth that reside on the other end of the ocean. It's an important mission, Revik, one that might take a long time, and as such we will be expected to mate. It is a charge I take most seriously indeed. King Baza spoke with such hushed reverence, such righteous assurance, Revik had to laugh. You're not going anywhere. You're going to be sitting on this bench with me, watching the ships come in, wishing we could afford Gelfi. As we are called out from the sea, so are we called back. It would be better to go with a friend. King Bazis clapped a meaty hand on Revik's shoulder before shuffling off into the din of the bad wharf. Revik watched him go. The smell of fish and crab wafted up, pungent, not unwelcome. Distantly, he could hear an auction taking place as the city's poshest restaurants tried to outbid each other for the best catches of the day. To a tourist, everything in Aristai might have seemed as it had been for 100 years, since the Aristai had been driven out permanently. Except these days, permanence had taken on a distinctly impermanent quality. The city was changing. No one had ever accused Revik of having a brain worth celebrating, but his eyes worked fine. Informant is such an ugly word, though in Revik's case, he felt it quite apt. Even a few months ago, he could have wandered down the right alleyway and found some filthy indiscretion to file away until he found the right buyer. Those same alleyways were now empty. The world was discreet again. The most organized gangs had gone to ground or closed up shop. Even the usual peacekeepers had been called away. His main source of commerce and his main source of protection drying up at the same time presented unique challenges for someone with no discernible skills, other than being a filthy rat. Revik even missed Ames and that huge bastard grin, though his last few interactions with them had caused a considerable amount of pain in unmentionable places, the proverbial cost of doing business. Given the circumstances, was King Bazis so insane to think about setting out for a new land? It was the kind of provocative question Revik generally tried to avoid. Of course, the scientists and the intellectuals and the mathematicians and the oceanographers and cartographers and probably a few others with advanced degrees spoke with one voice on the subject. There was no land beyond what was known. But smart people didn't know everything. In Revik's experience, smart people often knew the least about what was really going on around them. Take what happened to the turbines. Surprise, assholes. Maybe the conspiracy theories were true. Perhaps there was something out there, something worth finding. And didn't King Bazis say something about breeding? And two men plopped down on the bench next to Revik. They sat close, forcing Revik to pull his lanky frame upright to avoid being squished. Revik the rat, we've been looking all over for you. Philiad didn't say it angry, but he was angry. Tomer, the brute on Revik's left, didn't look angry at all, which made Revik nervous. Philiad scratched his scalp vigorously. Revik could see flakes of dandruff fall across his shoulders, observant to the last. You seem surprised to see me. I suppose the people you sell down the river don't usually come back, do they? But you got unlucky. Some peacekeeper big shots think it might not be such a bad idea to have a guy like me out and about, given the state of the world. Someone who can get things done. Someone who can watch over the bad wharf. Someone who really believes in Aristai. Philiad grinned as he said it, the absurd humor of the idea apparent even to him. I think maybe you're getting the wrong idea. Those bastards put the squeeze on me, especially the big one with the tattoos. Everybody saw it happen. Revik kept it plausible. Yeah, everyone saw it happen, Philiad said, still scratching his scalp. But they've seen it happen before, too. You get your ass kicked by those two cops and like magic, somebody goes down. A warehouse gets raided. Somebody pinches me when I'm with my girl. Philiad stopped scratching and stared into Revik's eyes. A tiny line of blood ran from his head, pooling around his eyebrow. You got greedy, Revik. You filled your belly too many times, and you thought because the food was rotten no one would care. This time, somebody cares. The garrote was around Revik's neck by the time he thought to run. Tomer was strong, far stronger than Revik, and the wire dug into the soft flesh of Revik's throat inexorably, like the waves breaking upon the shore. Revik flailed wildly, flinging his arms behind him to try and catch some part of Tomer's body, grasping, desperate, dying. What saved Revik's neck was a minor illusion of physiology that had plagued him his entire life. Because of his small personality, people subconsciously thought of him as a small man. But Revik was tall, with long legs that had, up until that moment, served very little practical purpose. Revik rose to his full height, lifting Tomar off the ground. In desperation, Revik tilted his torso forward, and in doing so, managed to throw Tomar forward. Tomar's back came down on the stone wall overlooking the water with a sickening crack. Philiad had been enjoying the show until that point. With Tomar moaning on the ground, the first sign of emotion he'd made during the entire incident, Philiad made a grab for Revik. His hands closed around Revik's waist for a moment, but Revik shook him off and bolted away at top speed like a stallion who'd thrown his rider. Revik didn't see the snapper come out. He didn't need to. He heard the bullets ricocheting off the pavement behind him. "We'll find you, Revik," Philiad screamed. "Aristai isn't safe for you. Nowhere in the world is safe for a rat like you." After that, it was an easy decision for Revik to sail away from his problems.